What's up, Vetters? Patrick here with Vetted. I have a bombshell video for y'all today. So, recently, AJ Gentile from the Y-Files went on Joe Rogan. It was a phenomenal episode. I actually listened to the entire thing. I highly recommend. I'll put a link in the description to the full interview. But in today's video, we're going to be covering something that AJ said during this interview about Hal Puthoff. And when you hear it, it's crazy, and this is going to be quite an iceberg of a video. So if you remember, not too long ago, I made a video that included a clip about Richard Doty saying this about Lou Elizondo.
I was offered a job in 2019 by the United States Space Force where Lou Elizondo worked, to work with him in disinformation. And I said, not no, but hell no. I'll never do that again.
Did Lou bend the knee?
Worked for him. I don't know what he did. You'd have to ask Lou.
Okay.
Now, I made a video about that, so I'll put a link in the description. You can go check out that whole thing. Well, Richard Doty's not out of the woodwork yet here, because what AJ said about Richard Doty and Hal Puthoff in this Joe Rogan interview is going to leave you speechless. And again, I don't even know where to begin. So let's just get started. Please hit that like button, Vetters. That really helps out the videos. And of course, if you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button. I put out new videos every week about the UFO phenomena, and I'm trying to get to 100,000 subscribers before the end of the year. I think we can make it happen. Now let's jump into this video. So first, let me start with this clip of AJ talking about Richard Doty multiple times actually during the interview. So I've kind of clipped it all together, right? So let's take a look at the first clip of 3.
Well, this is what Hal Puthoff said. He said that the government of the United States has at least 10 of these things. And I said, well, other governments have them? And he said, yes. And I said, well, do they have similar numbers? He's like, we believe so. So they don't know. So essentially what he was kind of alluding to is that there's basically like a kind of Manhattan Project to try to back engineer these things. And whoever figures it out first is going to have a massive advantage.
Right.
And it would be nice if it was us.
It would be nice. Hal Puthoff has been connected to a lot of disinformation campaigns. I love the guy and his work, but he has been connected to disinformation campaigns with known disinformation.
Think about what subjects?
About disclosure. Like, you heard the name Richard Doty?
Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, he...
Want some coffee?
Yeah, let's have some coffee.
So this exchange gets briefly interrupted by a coffee break, which is fine. But later on, they come back to this subject. And this is what AJ had to say.
And that's the frustration about disclosure, is how far could we be by now?
Right.
You know, had there been disclosure in 47 or whatever.
It's even more of a psyop if it's all bullshit. Like, it's a psyop if it actually is like, wow, the government is actually really good at one thing. They're good at keeping secrets about UFOs.
That's right.
But if they're not, if it's all bullshit, like, boy, how weird that we've been, like, focusing on this nonsense. Like, as a culture, it got in the front page of the New York Times in 2017. But meanwhile, it's all nonsense.
Right.
That's almost less likely.
Well, if you look at what Doty did in the 70s and 80s with Paul Benowitz, when Benowitz discovered this advanced technology on Kirtland Air Force Base, you know, he called the base and said, hey, I think there's UFOs. So they send Doty out. He was Air Force Intelligence, OSI. They send him out to Benowitz, and he's like, Paul, I think it might be UFOs. It is aliens. And Paul gets a little bit wacky, and he starts intercepting signals from outer space, and they're sending him messages, but it turned out it's really the NSA rented a house across the street, and Paul is committed at some point. And then Doty, over the years, changes his story and says, no, a lot of it is actually true. But Doty has also, he said as recently as 2019, Hal Puthoff tried to recruit him for a disinformation campaign with ATIP.
Really? So Hal Puthoff has been a part of disinformation campaigns?
Allegedly forever.
And what have they been doing with these disinformation campaigns? What have they been trying to muddle?
Just to keep guys like you and me fascinated and trying to figure stuff out while they can just operate their advanced technology in peace. God. Like, let them think it's aliens and UFOs. That's fine.
What a dirty thing to do to
filthy.
us.
And what's crazy about this whole thing is that Joe Rogan just had Hal Puthoff on his podcast, and this is how they started the interview, which was kind of interesting.
Al,
Hey.
what's happening?
Oh, lots happening.
A
really.
lot. Thank
lot.
you so much for being here. I'm very excited to talk to you. I've been thinking about nothing but that since that dinner that we had a few months ago.
Oh, yes.
Thinking about it a lot.
Yeah.
You told me a lot of crazy stuff. So
Yeah, well, it just seems like that's been my thing in life. Is get involved in the crazy stuff no matter where it comes from.
So could Hal Puthoff be spreading misinformation in the UFO community and trying to use Richard Doty to use it? I don't know. Very interesting comments from AJ about this, for sure. It gets crazier. So look, AJ continues to talk about Richard Doty later on in the interview as well, again, coming back to this particular point.
So the artist angle is a conspiracy angle. There's a man named John Lundberg who was part of a group called CircleMakers.org, which is an art project and also a sociology experiment. He would make fake crop circles to see how people would react. Years later, Lundberg and some associates created a documentary called Mirage Men, which is an excellent documentary. And it's mostly about Richard Doty and his disinformation campaign on behalf of the Air Force to discredit the UFO community, drove Paul Benowitz nuts. Bill Moore, who's the guy who essentially brought Roswell out to the public. Bill Moore was taking payments and being fed information from Doty to muddy the waters in the UFO community. He finally came clean in '89, was booed off the stage at MUFON, and everything just unraveled. So it's all disinfo.
they booed him off the stage?
Because he finally said, look, I've been working with the government. A lot of the stuff I've been saying, they told me to say. Majestic 12, all this stuff was coming from Doty, and they didn't want to hear it. They didn't want to, and his career was basically over that day.
Wow.
Bill Moore. There was no Roswell story before his book, and that was Doty. So the documentary about Doty was directed and put together by Lundberg and his associates. Lundberg was one of the original circle makers that would make these fake crop circles to see how people would react. I just thought it was an interesting connection.
Very interesting from AJ to kind of give the breakdown of the history of Richard Doty, Bill Moore, Paul Benowitz, right? And how does Hal Puthoff fit into this, right? He was around during that time too, which is interesting. Now, going back to the story AJ was telling about Bill Moore that was set up in the Mirage Men documentary, I found this clip from Red Panda Koala online that kind of explains the story a little bit and shows a clip from Bill Moore's famous 1989 MUFON symposium speech where he got booed off the stage for coming clean about being paid to spread misinformation in the community.
Bill's infamy comes from his willingness to cooperate with intelligence agencies in disseminating known UFO disinformation. Bill Moore came to prominence in the UFO scene by being the first to release a book about Roswell with the release of The Roswell Incident in 1980. According to Moore, this put him on the radar of intelligence agencies. He claims that officials from these agencies offered to share information with him in exchange for cooperation monitoring the UFO community. Moore claims he knew this was a sketch deal but figured the access he was getting would be valuable to a degree in understanding the UFO cover-up. He felt he could deduce fact from fiction in what the Air Force officers were telling him. Moore was eventually hired by a group of intelligence agents to keep tabs on a UFO researcher named Paul Benowitz, who had been filming experimental aircraft at Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico. The Air Force ran a psychological profile and disinformation campaign on the unsuspecting physicist, and in return, Air Force intelligence would let Moore in on classified UFO material. This relationship would be exposed at the 1989 MUFON conference in Las Vegas. In what would be one of the most dramatic things to happen at a UFO conference, Bill Moore would announce his role in the disinformation campaign, and the audience was not happy to learn that one of the most prominent UFO researchers was a disinformation agent.
Of my knowledge, it was all disinformation, and I was the unfortunate one who had unwittingly supplied the fuel to those who were spreading the fire. I've held my silence on this matter for more than 6 years. Now you know the truth. Disinformation. Am I currently involved with providing information to any government agency about UFOs or about people involved with the UFO phenomenon? Answer, no. I have not had any such involvement since 1984.
frankly, I'm a little ashamed of some people in this audience, regardless of what you believe, what you hear, or not.
Now, what's a little more interesting is I went and found that original speech from Bill Moore at the 1989 MUFON Symposium. And there was another part of that speech that I listened to that I thought was worth listening to. Take a look.
It was Falcon who sought me out in September of 1980. And it was Richard Doty, then with AFOSI at Kirtland Air Force Base, who soon came into play as the middleman in that process. Shortly thereafter, it became apparent to me that my supplying information to the government through Doty on the activities of Paul Benowitz, APRO, and to a lesser extent several other individuals was to be a part of this equation. I also discovered that whatever it was that Benowitz was involved with, he was the subject of considerable interest on the part of not one, but several government agencies, and that they were actively trying to defuse him by pumping as much disinformation through him as he could possibly absorb. Being a very small part of that process gave me, I thought, something of an advantage. It became my intention to play that advantage for all the information I could get out of it.
All right, y'all. So look, I'm going to put links in the description to everything I showed today so you can go check it out for yourself. And I highly recommend that full interview with AJ on from the Y-Files on Joe Rogan. Such a great interview. All right, y'all. What do you think? Hal Puthoff, disinformation agent, Richard Doty. What's going on here, y'all? A lot of craziness happening here, and it sounds like it's been happening for decades. Let me know. Leave your comments down below. We'll see you on the next one, Vetters. Remember, every day's a gift, y'all. Peace.